Well, hello there, watching the press preview, a first look at what is on the front pages. Time then to see what's making the headlines with the CEO of Total Politics Group, Mark Wallace, and the political journalist Zoe Grunewald. Welcome to both of you. So to the front pages then, let us start with The Guardian, reporting on people fleeing Rafah as Israel intensifies its bombardment. The Telegraph looks at the Chancellor urging the Bank of England not to cut interest rates too quickly, as its governor hints at a fall in borrowing costs. And The Express asks who will win the tug-of-war over interest rates, reporting on Hunt's warning to Andrew Bailey. Daily Mail leads with 5 babies dying of whooping cough as cases triple in comparison to last year. That is also the same story dominating the Metro. 5 babies die. And the Daily Mirror too, whooping cough warning, their headline. Well, the Eye speaks to Boris Johnson's former chief advisor, who claims to have saved tens of thousands of lives during the pandemic. Financial Times has news of a possible takeover of the Australian mining firm Anglo American. Well, a reminder, by scanning the QR code you'll see on screen during the programme, you can check out the front pages of tomorrow's newspapers while you listen to our guests, so let's head to them. Mark Wallace and Zoe Grunewald, welcome properly to both of you. Let's kick off with the story we're looking ahead to, in fact, isn't it, which is a big speech by Sir Keir Starmer about what he's going to do about migration, Mark.
Exactly. Firstly, I think it's really interesting to see how differently this is treated between 2 different newspapers on different sides of politics. The Guardian is the one that's gone for Starmer pledges to rip up Rwanda scheme. The Telegraph carefully avoids this in its headline. You might have thought that if they were out to really activate their readers, to rile them up, they would have gone for, look, Starmer's surrendering on Rwanda just after it's been got through Parliament. Instead, they're, if anything, giving quite a helpful headline, I think, the Daily Telegraph to Keir Starmer. He will use terror laws to tackle migrant crossings, which is where he wants to be on this topic. Right? He wants to be tough. He's going to be standing not necessarily on the White Cliffs of Dover, but pretty close. He'll be down in Dover delivering this speech, thumping his chest a bit, talking about integrated counter-terror-based command, Interpol cooperation. I think he even says we'll be. He sends a message saying that this will be hostile. This is going to be hostile territory to people smuggling gangs, which is again very interesting language. He's kind of riffing somewhat. He's skirting around the hostile environment language you used to hear from Theresa May when she was Home Secretary and Prime Minister, which for a long time was anathema to Labour. And it's really, really interesting that he wants to get out on this topic right now. Obviously, in Dover, where he just picked up an MP yesterday. In the constituency of his newest MP, Natalie Elphicke, any clues about whether she'll be standing alongside him? We'll come on to another story about her in a minute, but, quite extraordinary and tough-sounding. Do they know that this is a critical election issue for those seats they want to win back?
I think so. So I think this is all part of their scheme to take those 2019 Conservative voters and say to them, you're much safer in the hands of Labour. But this is also really significant because migration seemed to be one of the areas that Sunak was actually starting to do fairly well in again. So he managed to get his Rwanda legislation through the House with fairly little rebellion. You know, there was talk that it could completely split the Conservative Party. That didn't happen. And then there was talk the other week, of course, that migrants were pouring over the border in Ireland, which all the Tory MPs were saying, this is clear evidence that the Rwanda scheme is working as a deterrent. But now Starmer has managed to actually turn the conversation back on Sunak. Not only has he taken one of his sort of strongest, most anti-immigration MPs, who has now said she actually thinks that this will be safer in the hands of the Labour Party, but he's now going directly onto Natalie Elphicke's turf and indeed Sunak's turf, so to speak, as well, and basically saying actually only Labour can get a grip of illegal migration. But what's really interesting about this is he's actually focusing on international cooperation. He's talking about closer ties with the EU, and it's really interesting that Natalie Elphicke is saying actually I think Labour have got a better grip on it, because she's been one of the most kind of anti-EU MPs. She was part of the ERG. So it's really interesting to see that shift and almost that shift in attitude from MPs towards the need for closer ties with the EU to fix this problem.
Yes, the European Research Group and indeed the New Conservatives as well, firmly in the right of the party. Absolutely fascinating. I don't know if we've got The Guardian to show on this, but their headline, Starmer pledges to rip up Rwanda scheme, as you said. It's not their lead story, mind you. Keir Starmer will promise to rip up the government's Rwanda scheme and divert £75 million to fund hundreds of new officers to tackle people smuggling with new counter-terror powers. So similar. Meantime, Natalie Elphicke, back to the Telegraph, Rayner assures MPs Elphicke will have no role in Labour policies. Fascinating, Mark.
Yes, there's been a bit. I mean, it was a moment of high drama that only really the format of the House of Commons as a room can actually deliver. Someone literally crossing the floor, an MP standing up for that really destabilising moment immediately before PMQ starts to stand up and walk just those few yards from the government benches to the opposition, as she did. Very well timed, very well targeted by Labour. We now see all the more why it happened this week. That was about the fact it was a Conservative MP. The backlash is a lot of it circulated around which Conservative MP it was, and there's quite a lot of I think there's quite a lot of heat in this inside the Labour Party, and people not necessarily people, particularly those who have concerns that Keir Starmer's not left wing enough from their point of view already, have concerns about this as suggesting that it maybe doesn't have any values. I think there's quite a lot of this is overplayed. The fact is he's so far ahead in the polls. He can do this stuff to mess with the government, destabilise Sunak, ruin the Tories' week yet another week. And he's got such a commanding lead and such a grip on the machinery of his party. I don't think it's going to bother them that much. But this is about internal Labour politics of Angela Rayner trying to reassure people.
Oh, no, it was all genuinely fascinating yesterday, wasn't it? But yes, Natalie Elphicke talked about going to the centre ground, and actually his words on migration issues, which we saw in The Telegraph and The Guardian, you know, not what you'd necessarily expect to hear from a prospective Labour Prime Minister.
Well, you say that, but, you know, as I just said before, actually, there's a lot of talk about working with the EU, a lot of talk about, actually, some of the language he uses about he's going to focus his attention on the gangs, the criminal gangs that are putting migrants in boats. It's not so much that kind of language you sometimes see at the right of the Tory party, which is actually these people are coming over here, taking advantage of the things that this country has to offer. Actually, I think Labour's 5-point plan, they talk a lot more about stopping it at the source, putting aid into countries to kind of stop people from departing.
But we have heard all of we've heard these exact things before from successive Conservative governments as well. I think where they're going to have an issue is what is the secret sauce in this plan that's going to get stuff done that all the other plans didn't do. So whether it was David Cameron funding people to come directly from Syrian refugee camps in the region, in order, you know, the most in need, rather than people crossing the Channel, whether it was extra deals with France, whether it was we've definitely heard the stuff about using anti-terror laws before as well. I'm not sure what the real secret message is. What's the magic trick going to be that's going to make it work?
I think actually it's incredibly complex because a lot of it is about the push factors as well, and you can't, you know, the UK is only a small island. It can't fix what is going to be a global migration crisis on its own, and that's, you know, we see climate change, unrest, all these things are going to make it worse. But something Starmer does talk about, and actually I think it's much easier to talk about than to do, is to fix the problems in the Home Office and speed up those sort of detention processes as well.
Yeah, plenty of coverage on that. Coming to a constituency near Natalie Elphicke, obviously Dover. In the meantime, just very quickly on Nadim Zahawi, he who was Vaccines Minister, 65th Tory to announce that he's standing down, Mark.
Yes, and he certainly won't be the last. The Conservative Party, the Conservative whips asked all Tory MPs, well, over a year ago now, to confirm if they were going to stand again or not. And a lot of them said, oh, yes, of course I'll be standing again. And in fact, have just been biding their time, or they've changed their mind because stuff's got worse. So currently it seems like the most likely ways of leaving Parliament as a Tory MP are...
I mean, are they at record levels now? Because, I mean, it is considerable in other parliaments as well, isn't it? The numbers leaving.
It is considerable. I mean, I think it's
loss.
Over 90% of current Conservative MPs have been elected 2010 or since. So there's a lot of churn in our system anyway. There's been a lot of churn politically through Brexit and so on, as we've seen. This is going to grow further. So if you're not choosing to stand down before the election, you're not joining the Labour Party, as we've seen 2 Conservative MPs go in the last fortnight, then obviously a lot of them worrying about losing their seats instead.
Well, we mentioned he was Vaccines Minister. We'll come to a story now which is dominating a number of newspapers, which has, you know, it harks back to the pandemic, which is this terrible whooping cough outbreak, which is claiming the lives of 5 babies in England now. Amid fears, the Mail says, of the worst outbreak in 40 years, partly because our immunity is partly drained, isn't it?
Yeah, so I was actually watching an expert on your programme earlier talking about this, and they were saying actually it's every few years you do see an increase in whooping cough cases, but because of the pandemic, it was kind of slowed down, and now it seems to be condensed. So you've got, as you say, waning immunity, you've got much lower vaccination rates, and then you see this perfect storm for this illness to spread. And, you know, actually, I had whooping cough when I was a teenager. It's a horrible, horrible thing to have, even as a teenager. As a baby, it's really tragic, and as we can see, it has absolutely tragic consequences. So absolutely, you can see there's going to be a push for immunisations, but you know, it's a real worry when you see these kind of illnesses that were virtually eradicated, or, you know, we're hardly seen of anymore, come back in this way. It just shows how society has actually regressed in terms of vaccination rates.
And some strong messaging from health authorities, one of which is we normally see our peak in the summer, which means it could be getting worse. But secondly, the best way to save babies is to vaccinate pregnant women.
Yes, and while understandably, a lot of people, I think, worry specifically about the idea of vaccinating children, there's very important messaging that it is safe to vaccinate infants, and you can take that vaccination too. But the real wonder of this vaccine is you can get vaccinated while pregnant. Your baby before birth will have that protection and will be born at its most vulnerable to this horrible disease already with that protection drawn from its mother. And that's the real message that, sadly, for various reasons, has obviously the rates have dipped somewhat, and we see some of these tragic consequences.
Absolutely. It's the lead story for the Metro there as well. With their headline, the biggest outbreak of whooping cough in more than a decade has killed 5 babies. The newborns, all under 3 months old, are among 2,900 cases already recorded in 2024, 3 times as many as the whole of last year. That's the UK Health Security Agency. You know, it was billed as the 100-day cough, wasn't it? If they'd been more clear and said, the 100-day cough is whooping cough, that messaging might have... I don't know if that messaging would have been more helpful to people. I'm not sure.
I'm not sure. I'm not sure how much of it is poor public health communications. I'm not sure how much of it is now that there has just been this spread of anti-vaccination messages that we can't keep track of because they're on WhatsApp, they're on Twitter, they're on Facebook, they're across social media. It's hard to really identify the cause, but what is absolutely the case is that clearly this isn't getting through to people in the same way it used to. So the government is going to have to work very hard, I think, to keep pace and actually go one step ahead of those anti-vax messages that are spreading.
Yes, and this contributes to anti-lockdown messaging as well, doesn't it? Because of the sort of, our immunity wanes through that.
Yes, it's worth noting that vaccination rates have not fallen, in the case of whooping cough, massively, but they've fallen sufficiently, even by a few percentage points in terms of mothers and infants, to have even this kind of consequence on that scale. Herd immunity is a real thing. It provides protection, including to people who can't get vaccinated, are protected by other people getting a vaccine. And so that's the message that's got to get out to people.
OK. Coming up, plenty more, including interest rates held again. But how do you solve a problem like inflation? Back with that in just a moment. Well, welcome back. You are watching the Press Preview. With me once again, Mark Wallace and Zoe Grunewald. Welcome back to both of you. Let us go to interest rates. The decision today, expecting the next one in June, of course. The decision was to hold interest rates at 5.25%. But the indicators, Zoe, as we heard from the Bank of England governor, are that there will be a change soon.
Yes, so the papers are talking a bit about this kind of tug-of-war between the Bank of England, Andrew Bailey and Jeremy Hunt, where the Bank of England are quite keen to bring interest rates down, but the government are very worried about inflation. And obviously we know one of Rishi Sunak's pledges was to bring inflation down. So there is this kind of tension now. And what's been quite interesting about this is Sunak made bringing inflation down one of his key pledges, but at the time many people pointed out, well, actually, many of those levers aren't really in the control of the government. They're deliberately in the control of the Bank of England. And now what we're seeing is that continued tug-of-war where it's like the government want to take credit for when things are going well, when interest rates are coming down, when inflation's coming down. When things are going badly, they can keep the Bank of England at arm's length and say, oh, it's actually nothing to do with us. So it's just more of that playing out, but it's very interesting to see how the kind of powers that be struggle over this kind of issue.
And in terms of the numbers, Andrew Bailey suggesting that inflation was around 3%. I think you were saying that May the 22nd is the next inflation data. But the problem is the service sector running at 6% inflation, which is 80% of our economy, and wage inflation, 5.6%, although I know they're debating the ONS numbers on this. So elements of the economy are still strongly in inflationary territory. But this idea in the Express that Jeremy Hunter said, oh, don't rush it, Andrew, you know, take your time. Politically, surely they want to see interest rates falling.
Well, there's a bit of a tug-of-war, I suppose, within a Chancellor's heart over this, right? If you're talking about what do you think is the most political, the biggest political priority, what has the most political pain to it? There's inflation, we've come through this cost of living crisis. A lot, you know, remember the inflation figure is a 12 months to that date figure. So where we've still got, particularly onto wage inflation, I think there's quite a lot of what was happening last spring when companies were getting to a new financial year, they were handing out their pay awards on the back of 10, 11% kind of in inflation a lot of people were facing. That's working its way out of the system still. Interest rates, obviously, being high is also painful. There's been a bit of kind of cope going on Tory benches of thinking, well, you know, interest rates falling will help to reduce the pain. The fact is, if you fixed your mortgage 5, 7, 10 years ago, interest rates falling a bit is still going to... No one's going to be saying, thank you, Chancellor,
we're talking about a 0.25% cut,
You're still going to be
5
seeing a
1/4.
big jump from your 1-2% fixed mortgages. Personally, I think this tug-of-war is in the wrong direction. I think it's... the fact is, the Monetary Policy Committee continually lag rather than drive the data on inflation. They continually overcorrect one direction or another. I think the Bank of England it's alarming to me the Bank of England is more enthusiastic about a rate cut than the Chancellor, but the problem there is that neither of them is enthusiastic enough. It seems to me that inflation is falling, it's continuing to fall. The fact is that if you cut interest rates, it takes a bit of time for that to feed through. It's not it doesn't have an immediate impact on inflation the next day. I fear what we're going to see is we're going to see interest rates kept high for too long, just as they were kept low for far too long after the financial crisis. We had emergency interest rates for like a decade and then wondered where inflation came from. I mean,
that has certainly been the criticism. They were too slow to notice inflation creeping up. But this idea that Jeremy Hunt has urged the Bank of England not to cut interest rates too quickly after the governor opened the door to a steep fall in borrowing costs. The Chancellor intervened after Mr Bailey suggested rates could come down faster than market expectations. And Ed Conway, our economics editor, asked him about political pressure, to which he said, politics does not enter the room when the Monetary Policy Committee meets. So there we are.
But monetary policy definitely enters the room when politicians meet. And that's what's interesting here is also, of course, that while interest rates aren't changing, bank mortgage rates are going up and your savings rates are still going down. So I think there's going to be quite a lot of pressure focusing on some of the financial services sector about whether they're having, you know, they're getting kind of they got the cream at both ends of this equation, the consumer's expense.
Now, we're heading to a story to which I only know this sentence. CEO tells workers, I'm not your mum. You might have to explain what this is all about. Zoe.
Yeah, so this is the head of public relations at a Chinese search giant called Baidu. She's basically, the FT says she's created her own PR crisis after posting videos on social media demeaning staff. She said, I can make you jobless in this industry. I'm not your mum. I only care about results. And this has triggered a conversation, obviously, as you can imagine, amongst workers who have said, actually, is that a nice way to treat your staff? Apparently, this company are known for doing the 996 method, meaning they start work at 9, leave work at 9 and work 6 days a week. And I think you just have to ask at that point, what's the point of making that money and going to do that job if you only have 1 day a week?
I'm just hoping my bosses aren't listening.
Yeah. This is a message.
Currently coming up with the ideas for new policy work. But I mean, you know, latest update from the Workers' Paradise, which is the People's Republic of China. I mean, there's an amazing bit in here. It's dystopian, kind of J.G. Ballard kind of scale, kind of oddity. There's one bit in here that she also boasted that she was so devoted to Baidu, the company, that she was unaware of her own son's class year at school, which is one of those things you're saying, even if you think that inside, it's not a great... I don't know, is he still at school? I don't know, maybe he could be doing 6 days a week, 12-hour-a-day work instead. What's he doing at primary school?
Yeah. Picture story. We saw the King and Harry possibly on the front pages yesterday evening, serving his people. There is the Prince shows off his beach volleyball skills down in Cornwall. It's on the front of the Telegraph as well. The Prince of Wales joined a game of volleyball in Newquay before visiting a project offering free accommodation to the homeless. This is part of his project, isn't it? It came as the King was seen attending his first military engagement since returning to public duty, in which the King joked, sorry for the surprise visit, you know, I just had to be I was glad to be allowed out, effectively. So, but, you know, nice to see them both, you know, with their own difficulties, obviously the Princess of Wales with cancer, the King with cancer, you know, both of them out and about.
Absolutely, and I think a lot of people will be really heartened to see that. I know it makes a huge difference to whether it's the charities that they're there to support, or I think the King was at the King attended the Buckingham Palace garden party yesterday, at which various public servants were invited in order to recognise their work. It means a lot to people to see them doing this, and great to see him back.
Lovely. Thank you very much indeed. See you for more in the 11, obviously. Mark, Zoe, thank you.